Woo, it's go time. Woo! Here we are again. There's some breaking news going on today. I'm here with Sarah and Mike. Sarah from Paychex and Mike from the one and only Advanced Partners. What's up, guys?
Hey, Richard. How's it going?
Oh, it's high noon on a Friday. I can't wait till 5 o'clock, right?
I know we made it this far. Let's keep rolling.
That's it. So I got to tell you, we're just going to deep dive into this because, we talked off stage about this. This week, there was a couple bills passed. Congress is doing a lot of good things here and maybe bad things. We don't know, but we're going to deep dive into it today. So first thing I want to talk about, and is 2 million Americans are unemployed. Sarah, I don't know if you knew that, but Washington Journal said that today. So what's your take on that? Seriously.
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of churn and shifting in the labor force as, this year has been really volatile. We've had a new administration. We've had a lot happening on a lot of different policy fronts. We just had that one big, beautiful bill pass back in July, as you noted. And we've seen a lot happen in trade and tariffs. We've seen a lot with immigration. And there's just all kinds of things going on, which is, I think, leading to a little bit of kind of concern and unrest, which creates volatility and uncertainty for businesses. And I think that's perhaps what you're seeing bearing out in the numbers today.
What's your take on that, Mike?
Yeah, I think the big key, at least from a staffing perspective, Richard, is what role can staffing agencies play in this, right? I think the big challenge, and Sarah kind of touched on it, is with the uncertainty, a lot of businesses are delaying some of those hiring decisions. Do they invest in the business in terms of expanding from a headcount standpoint? Obviously, if they choose to do so, it's important for staffing firms to play a critical role in that. And, part of it is educating, these businesses on just the value that they bring to the table and the role that they can play in finding those employees, especially nowadays when, I think there's been a shift, probably going back to since the pandemic started, right? A shift in how people want to work, where they want to work. More of that on-demand type of mentality. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And I still think it's a phenomenal opportunity for the staffing industry as a whole to step up and play a huge part in getting people back to work and really showing businesses out there the value that they bring to the table.
I think it's important though, Mike, sorry to just jump in really quick, Richard, but
go for it.
It's kind of like it's demonstrating but again, I like to point out the obvious sometimes, which is like the disconnect between Congress and where the business community is and where employers are. It's so out of pace in really Congress trying to understand what businesses need and give that to them from a policy perspective in the appropriate time frame.
Right. Well, here's what we're going to say. Congress, do they know anything about staffing? Seriously, we need to get more politicians that know what staffing's all about.
You want to go?
No, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Oh, well, I think, one of the roles that, I have here at Paychex is, going to the Hill, educating elected officials on, not just the staffing industry, but all the different aspects of the businesses that Paychex drives and how we support small businesses, how we contribute to, them hiring workers, contribute to them being competitive and anywhere in between. And I think that, the more that we're up there and the more that we're talking about the needs of the staffing industry in particular, the better policy outcomes that we're going to get. But still, that whole timing piece is really the sticky wicket because sometimes they're responsive to the needs of the staffing industry and others, but it doesn't always come when that need or relief is most prevalent.
Okay, Sarah, so I got to ask you, how's the Hill these days?
Pass.
I knew she was going to say that. Great answer.
So all is quiet on the Western Front, if you will. Right now, Congress is on break. It's August, and they are back in their districts, in their home states, and they're meeting with constituents. And my guess is that a lot of the folks listening in or viewing with us today have seen the clips on the news of some pretty raucous and volatile town hall meetings. And it's interesting because a lot of polling has come out on that big, beautiful bill. It's polling underwater. It's not popular with the electorate. And so that could portend some big issues next year when it's election time again.
I got to tell you, all the staffing firms I've been talking to, like the CEOs and owners, they are on uncharted waters. I mean, and you know that. I mean, they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We talked about it offline. It's like, seriously. So here's one I want to deep dive into: immigration. We got to jump into this because on my end, I mean, seriously, if some of these factories and industries, it could be in Arizona or Texas, I mean, and they lose 60 or 70% of their workforce, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's really, if you will, it's a farm to table issue, right? Or shovel in the ground issue to a family moving into their brand new home, right? And you have workers throughout that supply chain, if you will, of various skill sets, of various educational levels, of various statuses within the United States. And in some of those, you're perhaps going to have folks who may not be here under the appropriate circumstances. And, that is what you're seeing play out. Again, from an optics perspective, I think the approach the administration is taking has been very alarming to business, to employers, to workers, particularly those who are supporting some of those traditional industries like agriculture, construction, hospitality, and the like. And there's been this goal to deport a certain number of people from this country, and then to kind of full circle back to your opening comments, we're left with a dearth in the workforce, and what is it that we're to do about that? And I think right now, contributing to all of that uncertainty is the fact that we don't know how consumers are going to respond to that. And we don't know how businesses then in turn are going to respond to the concerns that consumers might be bringing, or the worries that they might have, as they're seeing all of these things play out.
Yeah.
What's your take on it, Mike?
No, I think Sarah's absolutely right. And where we've seen it, I want to say a little bit closer to home within our specific client base on the advanced partner side is the same exact concerns that Sarah highlighted, and this was even in the beginning when the new administration came in and a lot more was unknown. The concern over if there were mass deportations, what does that do, to their workforce? And now that we're seeing more of it come to fruition, it's not even the fear of deportation. It's, just the simple fact that you're seeing this occur in the communities. It's their workforce is not showing up to work because of the fear that, there could be an ICE raid or people coming to that place of work. So now obviously the staffing firms are left with, a shortage of people. So, that puts more pressure on them as a business owner to go out there and recruit more, right? And typically, as you guys touched on, these are lower paying, jobs that not everybody wants. So you're trying to have to go out there and scan a much wider, portion of the population to secure, if it's 10, 15, 20 roles, you might have to go through hundreds, if not thousands of resumes and applicants to find people that are not just willing to take the job, but they're dependable, reliable, and are going to show up timely, because that's the staffing firm's reputation on it, right? And as a result, what we're starting to see even more from these staffing firms is more and more questions about, okay, not only is it putting more pressure on me as a business, but what else can I be doing to differentiate myself? Should I be looking at other verticals? How can I continue to grow my business and potentially pivot into other areas, so I'm not having to take that loss, right? And I can continue to grow and expand given this uncertainty that we're in.
And it's like a readiness thing, right, Mike? I mean, it's not just, I love the industry specialization. That's a really critical piece, but it's also compliance as a service, for example, because even, already this year we've seen, updates and evolutions of the E-Verify system. Employers need to be ready with, making sure they've done their own audits of their I-9s and that they have a whole process and procedure in place in the event that ICE comes into the workplace and wants to conduct, I hate to say that R word, but the raid or, the workplace kind of review or investigation. And, there's a real opportunity for the staffing industry to also consider that type of service. I mean, it's HR support, it's legal services, it's, audit review. There's a lot of opportunity in there as you drill down into what's occurring.
Well, I think it's a good point too. And Richard, we did a webinar with Toby at ASA a few months back, and a lot of the questions were around exactly that. Sarah, it was what obligations did the staffing firm have around I-9 verification and compliance, because they are not obviously necessarily operating the work site, right? They're responsible for the employees on the work site. So, making sure that they're up to date with the most recent compliance, making sure that they have a good understanding of what they're responsible for and not responsible for. And if and when questions are asked, that they are prepared, right? And have the appropriate documentation and answers ready, so they can fulfill, whatever those expectations are. And obviously, between ASA, being a phenomenal advocate for the staffing industry, companies like Paychex and Advanced Partners, there to certainly help and provide that guidance. There's absolutely resources out there to help, but still a lot of uncertainty and a ton of questions, that these staffing firm owners have.
Yeah. And you know what? I got to ask you, Sarah, seriously, like in DC, are they aware of I know they want to go in and do I hate that word raid, but do they understand the economy, what's going to happen if they do this? I can just take everybody away. I mean, seriously, are they up there really aware of what's going to happen?
You told me to keep this nonpartisan.
Ooh, no, but I mean, I'll jump aside. Seriously, is there an awareness on that? Seriously, is this a topic they're really concerned about? I mean,
jokes aside, pardon me. Look, I think there's an awareness. I think there's a sensitivity to it. Certainly folks on the Hill are aware and they're looking at the impacts in their communities. So particularly House members, they're back in their districts and they're hearing a lot about this and they're hearing a lot about a number of other issues. And, is it landing? And I think, we only get sound bites, right? And so I think depending on sort of the news outlet you're focused on, you're going to get a certain point of view and a certain perspective. But, I think there's a sensitivity to it. I think the courageousness with which our elected officials are choosing to act or speak up or raise their hand is a thing that I think is in question. And it's going to take an incredible pain point to force change. So again, going back to that, out of step with what the process needs to be to get the relief in a timely manner, we're going to see that play out again.
Sounds good. Yeah, I just wanted staffing firms out there that, everybody's, fear right now of what's going to happen. So I didn't know if you had any inside stuff, but thank you for that. Yeah. Right there, right in the middle. Okay, so seriously, immigration is one of them things we're gonna be watching every day because we don't know it's gonna probably change tomorrow, different things. So it's one of them things that's very closely, probably one of the top ones for staffing. You probably both agree that this could affect a lot of the workforce. Mm-hmm. But now it's time for, of course, tariffs. Another subject that's very touchy with the staffing industry. Sarah, deep dive into this for us.
Well, so we've heard a lot about tariffs this year. There have been fits and starts. We've had Liberation Day. We've had, come and go. We've had another, kind of quote unquote Liberation Day occur here just this week. And we've had a whole host of tariffs that have come into play just this week. And, I think what's troubling again is, right now, the average tariff rate just across the board is just a little bit under 20%. The alarming part of that is that's the highest tariff rate we've had on average since 1930. Wow. And I think it's just ... because we know what happened after that. And so the pressure and the drive that is being exerted with regard to how we're handling and managing tariffs has almost seemed to be some sort of negotiating tactic or a way that we were bringing other countries to the table to talk about, whether we're doing investment into the United States. You've seen some announcements about Apple just this week, for example. And so the pressure is really significant. And, one of the things that is really notable to me, again, my sensitivity happens to be for the small business sector of our economy. And I think if you look at the small business sector writ large, it's an economic engine. But if we're drilling down and we're just thinking about your coffee shop, on the corner of Main Street, or you're thinking about, the dry cleaners or what have you, how are these tariffs coming down that supply chain to acutely affect those individual businesses? And that's really what I think is being lost in this whole conversation regarding tariffs, is that there is this understanding, or I think perception, that these larger, bigger box type industries, retail, for example, can really absorb some of the pressure of these costs, but it's a whole different equation for a small business. And that's really what I think needs to be given a little bit more attention and given a little bit more dare I say, compassion because of the process that these businesses have to go through to manage their supply chain, how they're ordering goods, how they're managing it through a process. And when they're putting that service or that good out onto the shelf, how can they manage costs? Do they have to pass it on to consumers? Do they absorb it? And how does that affect their ability to keep people employed, to keep their doors open, over the course of this next year, into 5 years from now? So there's just a lot that I think is not necessarily being considered as part of the overall debate.
What do you think, Mike?
No, I mean, as usual, Sarah's right.
This is why we have Mike here. No, this is why Mike's here.
This is great.
I agree. Mike just says, I agree.
No, to drill down, like when I think of what Sarah's saying in the impact on the staffing industry, again, going back to what we talked about, a lot of uncertainty, which does slow down, the hiring and the impact on the staffing industry is, there might not be as many opportunities for them to go out there and win contracts and obviously go out there and place people. So along with that, the staffing firms are having to figure out ways to become more efficient and more effective within their own businesses, right? Obviously, they have in-house employees, they have technologies that they're looking at. And I mean, Richard, we're out there obviously at the same events and you see there's great technology, right? There's things that are out there that will allow firms to become more efficient and more effective in what they do. And again, staffing agencies, although unique in what we do and in the focus, they're businesses, right? So these business owners are having to evaluate their own practices and procedures and find ways to continue to improve, and drive the bottom line in order to maximize, the revenue that they're bringing in order to help, weather, tougher times like this, right? Now, it's still very optimistic that, things are going to continue to improve and bounce back. And I genuinely mean that. And we're certainly seeing it, in certain segments of our base. And I think the genuine tone within the clients that we're speaking with is that of optimism. But again, many of them now are looking probably more, at least since I've been with Advance the last 4 years, more to technology, more to automation, to find ways to make themselves more efficient. That way, when things do pick back up, they're ready to hit the ground running, win more business, fill orders faster, and differentiate themselves from the staffing firm down the road.
You summed it up. And you know what? I feel for the staffing owners. I mean, besides getting candidates and clients, now you got to worry about what's going on, the government and the economy and stuff like that. This is what I got to talk to you, Mike, about. So resources wise, where do they go? I mean, come on, Advanced Partners. I mean, one of my family members here. I mean, you got to have a lot of resources. Can you just break that down real quick for like a minute about what you offer everybody?
Yeah. So from a content standpoint, this is something that has been a priority for me since I joined, and Sarah's been a phenomenal partner. And I say that in all seriousness. The one thing that we don't, there's no.
Why are you laughing, Sarah?
He said in all seriousness. And I was like,
no, we joke around.
I know. I love it.
I mean, we have ASA, SIA, are probably the two most prominent in terms of, trade organizations and supporting the staffing industry. They put out a ton of information and data and analysis and content. But there's a ton of staffing agencies that don't subscribe to that or aren't, getting that on a consistent basis, right? So making sure that they have visibility into that information. Certainly if you subscribe to that, it's great. I mean, there is literally daily content that's coming out about local legislation, national, federal legislation, as well as just news about the staffing industry as a whole. There is certainly information on the local level that you want to pay attention to, on the state level, any local laws, and there's different avenues for that. What we're doing at Advanced Partners, both within our client base and, outside the client base, is to put out as much information as we can via newsletters. We have a magazine that we put out on a quarterly basis to both non-clients and clients. And then a lot of it is just through media channels like this, right? Getting on your podcast. We do webinars with SIA, ASA. We're getting, Sarah connected with them as well, just to educate as much as possible, to help spread the word and really advocate on behalf of the staffing industry as a whole. So still a tremendous opportunity to do that. And certainly always looking for feedback from the industry. And when we're at these shows, we're not just there to promote Advanced Partners, but we want feedback. What are clients concerned about? What are, just staffing firms as a whole concerned about? And if there's an opportunity for us to advocate or push certain things on behalf of, we're more than willing to do that because, as the staffing industry succeeds, we all succeed, right?
You're right, brother.
Yeah, and the general economy as a whole, I firmly believe is more successful. So yeah, we're here to help, and certainly if there's anything that we can do, we want to make sure that we're on top of it and able to deliver.
And Richard, could I just hop in really quick, because I want to put a finer point on what Mike said, which is when we're with clients or even folks in the industry and they're bringing issues to us, we do evaluate. We make that evaluation, and there are times, and in fact, there are things that we are working on here at Paychex that have come up from that perspective, where we have actually turned it into legislative text that has been introduced as legislation on the Hill that we will try to drive so that we can open up better opportunity for the clients. And so that's a real tangible thing. And I just wanted to, kind of double down on that point, because I think people can say that, but we do take action on that.
Oh, and Shark approved on that too, by the way, just to let you know, seriously, you guys have great resources there. And I hate to say it, but like, people out there, if you watch the news, stop watching the news all the time. I mean, there's so many different resources there. You're all confused. And I see that with staffing. There's like, well, I watch this station. They're telling me different things. I like what Advanced Partners does because they got resources. They're doing the research with Paychex and everybody else. And they're going to give you the facts to grow. Seriously.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a big differentiator for us, being owned by Paychex. And I've said that since day one of joining, for a variety of reasons, but primarily having a government relations organization that Sarah heads up. No one in our space has that, and we take full advantage of it. Sarah will attest to it, but it's great. It's a huge education for us, right? We can take that feedback. We pull Sarah into our client discussion. She gets that feedback. She can talk to them about what's going on and take that feedback and hopefully turn it into tangible action, that we can deliver on both the local and federal level. So no one else can do that, at least in our space. And we take full advantage of it for sure.
Dude, I love both of you. Seriously, shout out to Advanced Partners and Paychex. Seriously, what you guys are doing in the industry. And I'm glad the Shark is part of this because seriously, we care about everybody. Seriously, the person that's a client or a non-client, we just care about you.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, so let's just deep dive in more because Sarah's got so much to talk about. The benefit bill, Sarah. You ready to deep dive into this?
Sure.
Let's do it. Tell me about the benefit bill because I think there are a lot of people out there doesn't know about it yet. So go for it.
Independent contractors benefit bill.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
right. Okay. So I think this is really going to some things that Mike has kind of like pinged off on throughout our time together already this afternoon, which is our workforce is changing, it's evolving, and it really, the big stimulus catalyst was, during the pandemic when people really started paving ways of working in a very different manner, and the independent worker sector of our workforce just exploded. And, some folks, say there's about 26 million of these folks out there working right now. So your 1099 employees, but there are some groups that are looking at like north of 70 million workers who are out there working in some capacity as an independent contractor. And some of them are very high earners. And there's a question about, what sort of benefits, what sort of resources do they have? And we know from research that the outcry for, health benefits and retirement benefits is really significant. And so we've even, internally explored ways to potentially provide those sort of resources and services to independent contractors. But we've seen leaders on Capitol Hill take real note of that and introduce what are considered portable benefit bills that would support independent contractors, but also would provide protections to employers so they wouldn't run afoul of classification issues. And so I'm going to call timeout on everything I'm just saying and kind of delve into sort of this hallowed ground of how we define a worker. And so this is really like a quintessential debate that we have had for decades and decades and decades on Capitol Hill, which is, are you an independent worker or are you a full-time employee? And if you're an employee, you're, if your employer offers it, entitled to, certain pay, certain benefits, and you have to follow, certain, laws that govern the workplace and govern how you pay your employees or your workers. On the other side of that are these folks, independent workers, who have said, I want a flexible arrangement. I want to work when I want to. And, and I will make those determinations for myself. They have less protection and less coverage under the law in terms of how they can access benefits. And so there's a push and a pull. So I'm going to, say Republicans and Democrats right now have a very strong disagreement on, what these independent workers, how they should be classified and whether or not they should all just be employees or, that has just been kind of like that quintessential kind of debate, right?
Yeah.
We're in this tug of war, and I say it's hallowed ground because we haven't been able to come to a conclusion that is a bipartisan conclusion, right? And so we've got some legislation that is on the Hill that could potentially move through the process because currently, I think most folks are aware, we refer to it here in Washington as a trifecta government. So we have, a House and a Senate that are Republican. We've got a White House that's a Republican, and a fairly right-leaning Supreme Court. And so when you're looking at ways to say there's also legislation that will codify how you define an independent worker, but also give them benefits in a way that provides adequate protection on both sides, that's something that has a shot at moving and should really be, I think, of interest to the independent workforce, but I think also to staffing companies who perhaps, throughout all these conversations, they're really having to kind of shift and adjust and be really agile through a lot of these uncertain times, but also as traditional W-2 employees are declining and we've got this increase in independent workers, like what does their business model look like? And do they evolve into firms that, can support 1099s, or also some of the legislation says, platforms can provide these benefits that employers can help independent workers access. Is that the staffing industry? Like, can they provide that forum because they're already organized as businesses and already kind of can tap into that type of a workforce? So I'll just leave that there, and maybe Mike wants to pick it up and say a little bit. We've talked so much on this over the last year, Mike and I.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add to that, it's funny, this topic actually, and I shared it with Sarah, this came up at SIA Exec Forum in one of the presentations about, and I can't remember who was saying it, but it was one of the panel discussions in a general session that, the staffing industry as a whole should consider this space in terms of, you see people looking at more of the independent worker space, those long-term assignments, versus what we would consider today, maybe that temporary or contingent, spot, just filling something in light industrial or warehouse or manufacturing. You're seeing this go more up, into those higher markup, IT, more professional roles. People are doing that 6-month, 12-month assignment, right? And looking to get paid. Obviously, they're getting paid more, but they need those benefits and everything that comes along with it. So traditionally, they were probably working those full-time jobs, to Sarah's point. So, and that is certainly a way to pivot, in terms of a strategy and supplement potentially lost revenue, because of declines in staffing industry. Others are just looking at it as a potential additional revenue stream, right, to grow their staffing business. And we know a lot of businesses out there anyways, Richard, are doing both permanent placement and, contingent labor. They're looking at this as potentially a third stream. So I think it's very relevant, absolutely something, to continue to keep an eye on. And the numbers show it's a growing segment of the workforce, to Sarah's point.
And I think it's interesting because it's really, exciting, I think for the independent workforce to, see that there are these, portable benefit type bills out there. There are some states, Pennsylvania, Richard, for example, is a state that has been exploring, how you do portable benefits at the state level, by example. So go Steeler Nation.
Yeah, here we go. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Skull. Excuse me. But it's now I've lost my train of thought. So boo on me. But no, I think it's just I totally lost my train of thought, so I guess we have to move on. I'll come back to it.
See what happens when you say Pittsburgh Nation?
I should have made
right down to something totally else.
Sorry.
Championships. Sorry, Mike.
Oh, right.
Go Bills.
I got nothing.
Oh, but yeah. So seriously, tying into that, I want to talk about a little bit about OT because overtime has been a concern big time with these staffing firms because do they have, the applications? Do they have the process to do this? after 40 hours, what happens? And we talked offline about this. I don't think a lot of people, Sarah, know about OT that, are you going to be taxed on it all or what? So break it down, because I think a lot of people is confused.
Tale of two cities here. So, again, one side you've got the employer, one side you have the employee. And I think, the big question to me is, right, again, it's like back to optics. Like, is this squeeze going to yield the juice that I think people are anticipating, right? So on one hand, you have, hourly workers, no tax on overtime. So like, what do you think about that? So that's a case by case basis on how an hourly worker might think about what that means. But what that means in the law that was just enacted and signed by the president is that there is no tax on overtime as defined under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it's definitionally tied to the federal law. So number one, not all employers define their hourly or salary workers to federal law. It might be state law. So that's kind of concern and issue number one. But issue number two, it's not time and a half that is not taxed. It's the half. Okay, so the expected benefit is about less than 10% of U.S. households may benefit, and the average expectation is about $1,500 in savings. Although the law allows up to, $12,500 to benefit. So when you kind of start drilling down into just those two issues that I noted from the outset on the employer side, there is an incredible amount of work that has to go into figuring out how you build systems that can appropriately track and monitor, and then remove the correct taxes, because also it's just federal income tax. It's not all of the taxes that are taken out of your paycheck. And so that causes an ever shrinking number in terms of, what tax savings that you have as part of that no tax on overtime. And so I think there's some folks that might wake up to this when they realize that the benefit isn't as great as the anticipation. And again, how do those hourly workers respond to that? Do they respond to that in the workplace? Do they respond to that, at the, the ballot box? There's a number of different ways, and sort of like how all of that gets tied together. It ties back to, our clients, it ties back to Advance, and how, we can at least just from a compliance perspective, properly manage that. So everything is done correctly and in full compliance with the law.
Wow. And you know what, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that. Everybody I talked to is like, wow, I'm going to double my salary. I'm going to have a different lifestyle. Seriously. I mean,
this is no tax on tips is the same thing, Richard. I mean, like about 40% of the tipped workers aren't even paying taxes, give or take. Right. So is there really going to be a benefit? And that's the question is,
man, you broke it down good, Sarah. What do you think, Mike? Because
I know.
I love it. Mike, what do you think? Because I'll be honest with you, myself and a lot of people, you see that, even my parents, other people's like, wow, no overtime, no tax on that. They think they're going to get like another 50, 60,000. That's not the facts.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, and Sarah broke it down really well. I think looking at it from a business owner's perspective, right, it makes me cringe if I'm handling all this internally myself. To be quite frank, I would absolutely be looking at an outside, and yes, a company like a Paychex or Advance Partners to help me manage this, because although, in current administration, looking to deregulate, right, and simplify, and yes, this on the surface is a positive, right, for workers and more money in your pocket, regardless of the percentage, right? I think unintended complexities that come along with it, right? And having to make sure that, to Sarah's point, you're calculating it correctly, you're paying your people appropriately, because if you're not, then what does that lead to, right? Potential lawsuit down the road, obligations, right? And penalties on your business. No one wants that, right? So just making sure that you are adequately, tracking and following would be certainly from a business standpoint where my mind is at. Because I don't want to put my business at further risk, right, of potentially, lawsuits, or just making, and quite frankly, I want to make sure I take care of my employees, right? And that is my differentiator, especially in the staffing space. The people, we're in the people business, right? So I want to make sure I'm taking care of people, paying them correctly. Because if I'm not, the firm down the road potentially will, and I'm going to lose those people.
Yep.
So even more important, I would say, in our space.
That was more information than we ever needed. Seriously, all joking aside, that was great stuff, Sarah. Seriously. So we're going to wrap things up here because we already been on for a while now. I mean, I got to bring Sarah back on. Before we go, I can get a shout out to my peeps here. We got to do this. Here we go. Advanced Partners. They put the fun, F-U-N, in funding. If you need funding, you need to call Advanced Partners. You like how I put that fun in there, Sarah? It's always about fun, right?
Hey,
Advanced
and I
Partners
can
and
also attest to Advanced Partners bringing the fun. They are a great business. They're great. They have great leadership, great partners. Can't say enough great things about them. So
I love it. Okay, so
I'm
we're wrapping
doubling
up.
down on
Brother Mike, thank you for coming on. Sarah, thank you again. You'll have to come on
you.
again.
I'd
I
love
love
to.
this, seriously. So just tie it up, Sarah, for us. Anything else out there you want to give everybody advice for before we get out of here for the weekend?
You know, what I would say is how I would probably end any podcast when I have an opportunity to talk about how critically important it is to raise your voice and have a say, in the process in our democracy. If you're on the right or the left, it doesn't matter. You might have feelings about what is happening in our country, and the only way for you to make change, the only way for you to make a difference is for you to get involved. And if that's just voting, go exercise your rights. But if that's, finding your town hall meeting this month and going and asking your congressperson or your senator a question about why certain things are happening or not happening in Washington or even at the state level, you should do that. And there's plenty of information out there that will help you sort of gather your facts and then go ask really good questions and hold these people to account. That's why we have a democracy. That's why America is such an amazing place to be living in, to be working in, and you can participate and you can really make a difference. And I've seen it happen a million times. And well, maybe not a million, that's a lot, but I've seen it happen a lot. So go let your voice be heard.
Woo, we'll sum it up on that. That's a wrap. All right, everybody out there, staffing peeps, have a great weekend and we will talk to you soon. Thank you, both of you.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you, Richard.
See you later.